Well, hello everybody. Welcome. I'm on my porch this afternoon and I'm thinking about the bicentennial. So if you'd like to reminisce with me, I thought we'd go back to 1976. Now, to remember the bicentennial, you'd have to be probably around 50 because this July that will be officially 44 years. But there was a lot going on in Matthews in 1976. And the whole country. We were ready for a party. Times had been rough around, and there'd been Watergate, and the president had to resign. Everybody was ready for something more relaxing and happy, and a renewal of good spirit and patriotism. We really did celebrate it around here. Judy Ward had already written her play about Crickets on a Hill, about Lord Dunmore's last stand on Gwynn's Island. And we performed it that year in Richmond, so we took it on the road. Every church had special music programs and events. Everybody's mother and grandmother just about had a bicentennial dress, and I just remember some of them, and they were fun. The school children put on plays. I remember my cousins Kathy and Chris Miller, when they were little in the second grade, they had just adorable event at Lee Jackson, and they were all dressed up, and some of the children were happier about it than others. The country had a bicentennial commission, and there were big events all over the country from one end to the other. There were fireworks displays and concerts in New York and DC, of course, and we're used to history here in Virginia, so there's always a lot to celebrate about history in Virginia, but it was a special emphasis on everything. So from Yorktown and Charlottesville and Williamsburg, free things and all kinds of museum events were just open to the public, and it was just a whole plethora of wonderful events. Well, I was dating Wilson, and he and I were invited to come to Philadelphia with our friend Jim Holt. And Wilson and Jim had gone to Emory and Henry College together. Jim was working in D.C., and his parents had invited us to come and spend some time with them in Philadelphia, make that our base, and attend some of the nice things. That was really going to be the epicenter in America of the countdown, because that's, where the announcement of the Declaration of Independence had happened. So there was, I was very excited about it. So I wore this little bow on my wrist today because I don't want y'all to forget that I'm essentially prissy. Someone told me this recently that I made a comment about I didn't want something to be prissy, and they stopped and they said, I don't know how to tell you this, but when you were about 7 or 8 years old, the prissy boat left the dock and you were on it. So this is prissy. But it's also to remind me about Philadelphia, so I'll tell you. The clothes I wore to Philadelphia were mostly polyester, and it was 1976, and so I'm trying not to feel guilty about it, but I'm reminded about that same time, Lisa Callis, who's retired from teaching now and moved back from Richmond to Gwynn's Island, she was a hairdresser at that particular moment, and she came into the Golden Brook shop one afternoon, probably to check out my hair, because she was in charge of my hair then. And Mr. Bernard Morgan and Mr. Aubrey White had stopped by. And Mr. Bernard was wearing pale mint green, and Mr. Aubrey was wearing pale blue, their leisure suits. And they were certainly buttoned up type gentlemen. And so even in 76, those leisure suits, it's something about it just didn't ring right. And they left, and Lisa looked at me and she said, do you think they have any idea how many polyesters gave their lives for those suits? I laughed really hard. But I shouldn't have laughed, because my outfit's for Philadelphia. I wasn't going to go up there with pants and things. I was going to a major metropolitan city, and I packed only dresses, and that required slips and pantyhose and low-heel shoes. And I'll have to say, Wilson always looked nice. Lots of times when I didn't look so nice. And he was full of Brooks Brothers blazers and seersucker suits, and Jim looked nice. He was sort of a navy blue Brooks Brothers sort of person at the time. So it was extremely hot. And Jim loves to walk. So I spent a lot of time being really hot, really, really hot while we were in Philadelphia. But to divert my attention and Wilson's, Jim liked to play trivia. And it really wasn't so much me. It was Wilson and Jim. And that was something that they would fall into when they were visiting anyway. It could be about sports or it could be about movies. But for whatever reason, they settled on John Wayne trivia while we were up there. So it could be one question after breakfast about who played against John Wayne as the enemy in some movie, or it could be 10 questions, rapid fire. Nobody kept score. They just, on and off the whole time we were there, which was close to a week, there was a lot of John Wayne trivia. I was not part of that. I was just an innocent bystander. But I was happy to be there. There was so much excitement. Queen Elizabeth was going to come in on her yacht, the Britannia. The president was going to come. The Queen had sent her the gift from England ahead of time. It was, I think it was 5-ton replica of the Liberty Bell, and it was made in the same foundry that they made the one for the original Liberty Bell from the 1750s or whenever that was made. Can't ring the Liberty Bell anymore because of the crack, so this new one they could ring. It was a gift from the people of Great Britain. She was going to go to Boston and D.C. and Charlottesville on that trip, but she was coming in on her yacht. And we went to my first professional baseball game. The Phillies were playing the L.A. Dodgers. They lost, but it didn't matter. Well, it didn't matter to me anyway. They had a huge fireworks demonstration. That was, I think maybe that was the 5th of July. It was the day after the 4th. So there was fireworks going on all the time. Everywhere we went, I'd say, "How much further is it, Jim?" And he'd say, "Oh, just a couple more blocks." Well, that meant a minimum of 19 more blocks. And I was very hot in my polyester. But it didn't matter because we were just young. I was 24 years old. It was great. We went to a restaurant called Bookbinders that I loved. We had cheesesteaks. I'd never been to Independence Hall. I hadn't seen any of the sights. I'd been through Philadelphia, but never seen any of the sights. And we all seemed to have the right amount of patience because it was just crowded and there were lines for everything, but we still did it. The day that the Queen came, we got up early. Jim's parents were very sweet to us, great host and hostess. His mother didn't go out much, so she liked hearing about our adventures when we would come back. Sometimes Jim's daddy went with us. But this day, the three of us went down to the docks, and we were there when the Queen and Prince Philip came ashore. And we were fairly close. And I want to tell you that she was really beautiful, and her complexion cannot be underestimated. It was absolutely just what you always think when you read about an English rose complexion. She was just beautiful, and it doesn't translate to photographs, and I was really taken by that. Before that, President Ford had come in, and we saw Air Force One land, and we were very close to that, as close as you could be safely to a helicopter. So, you know, the same day I saw the President of the United States and the Queen of England. That was a lot. Trying to think. Well, there was one particular thing that I wanted to do. There was a fancy French restaurant called Le Panetier, and I'd read about it, and I really wanted to go, but I knew it was very expensive. But we all talked it over, and we decided that if our last full day we had enough money, we'd go for lunch. That seemed like a reasonable thing to do. And we made a reservation, and we did go. The John Wayne trivia was still flying over my head and around me. We got to the restaurant, and we were the only people there. But let me tell you, it was beautifully air-conditioned, and coming in out of that heat, it was a little bit past normal lunchtime. Maybe it was 1:30 or something like that, 1:45. So we were a little bit late getting there. It was the time we were supposed to be there, but it wasn't the busiest time of day. But many of the tourists probably weren't interested in a seated fancy meal, so that might have been the reason. But I remember I had Dover sole, and Wilson did too. I don't know what Jim had to eat. And we fully appreciated how nice the place was, and it was just so comfortable in there, and it was quiet and delicious and beautiful service, and it was everything I hoped it would be. And we had dessert, and the door opens, and in comes a party of 8. And the host of the party was John Wayne. No kidding. We had no clue that he was anywhere near Philadelphia or that he was expected. It hadn't been anything in the papers that we had seen. And they had been talking about John Wayne for 4 or 5 days, and there he was. Well, they thought they were pretty sophisticated fellows, but they were 8 or 10-year-old boys that day. Their mouths just flew open. And we just couldn't believe that John Wayne was in there. So they were seated right next to us. So they whispered, what are we going to do? Because we already had eaten, we'd had dessert. I said, well, we've just asked for some water. They're not going to throw us out. We're not keeping somebody else from having a table. There's nobody else here. So we listened. They didn't drag out their meal. They came, and the next thing we knew, the wine sommelier came, and he had one of those silver necklaces around his neck with, well, I guess you call it a necklace, a chain, with a little silver cup for the wine tasting. It's more ceremonial nowadays, I think, than anything they really use. But it was a very fine restaurant, and he came over and he said, Mr. Wayne, we're so honored to have you here, and I'm so-and-so, and I'd like to assist you if you have any questions at all about our wine menu, or if you'd like to talk about pairing any of the wines. And I'll have to say, he probably had some dollar signs in his eyes, because this was John Wayne, and I'm sure he thought he was going to sell some very fine wine. And John Wayne said, I want some white wine. I don't care what kind it is, and I want some ice in it. I thought I was going to die. I just waited for that man to hit the floor, but he didn't. And he got his wine, and he had ice in it. And I thought, well, don't ever let anybody tell you you can't have ice in your wine, because if John Wayne can, anybody can. You can have it any way you want. But they all seemed to have a very nice time there at that table, and he talked. He did most of the talking, and he was talking. He just made his last movie. He just made the movie Shootist, so he talked about that a little bit. And he talked about previous movie that he had made with Katharine Hepburn, and apparently he really liked working with her. And he talked about her love affair with Spencer Tracy. And my ears were just, picking all this up. And we were all just, so the fellows decided they needed a strategy, because they didn't want to interrupt him. They didn't want to bother him while he was eating, but they wanted to speak to John Wayne. So they decided that they would wait until he was all done and follow him out the restaurant, and hopefully as he was exiting, maybe they could say hello and perhaps shake his hand. So I decided that I would hold back, because it wasn't important to me. I had already seen the Queen's complexion, so I'd had all the thrills I could take for my celebration, and I would just cut the confusion. And there was a bay window there in the dining room that you could see on the street. And in that old part of Philadelphia, the streets are not much wider than, it's just one line of traffic, really, really narrow. So the maitre d' came over to ask John Wayne if there was anything else that they could get for him or anything he would like. And he says, well, just one thing. If it's all right with you, I'd like to go in the kitchen. I'd like to thank all your staff for this nice meal. And the maitre d' said, oh, no, sir, everyone will come out in the foyer and greet you, sir, so you don't have to go in the kitchen. So we thought that was really nice, because all three of us put a lot of value on appreciation. So that was nice. We like seeing that in our hero. So his party got ready to leave, and Wilson and Jim got up to leave, and they all went out in the hallway, and I lost their visual then, but I went to the window so I could see him exit down the steps into this narrow little street. And I saw out of the corner of my eye a big 18-wheel truck coming down the hill, and it was going very slowly because it had to, because it was no space. And the driver had his arm in the window was down, and he was driving, and he did this most classic double take I've ever seen, as John Wayne was coming down the steps, and he says, "Hiya, Duke!" And John Wayne says, "Hiya, friend." And then the guy tooted the horn thing on the 18-wheel truck, and it was the perfect ending. And Wilson and Jim did get to shake his hand, and they loved it. And so I saw the President of the United States, the Queen of England, and the Duke, all in probably just over 24 hours. That was really exciting. And Jim's family was so nice to us. And back here at home, I think about the people that Mrs. Mildred Hudgens, she was running market days and tying it into the bicentennial and working herself just to no end. And I think my favorite bicentennial character was real life person was Mrs. Naomi Thompson. Miss Naomi had this spirit, that's Cindy Hamlet's grandmother, this spirit that I think her blood must have run red, white, and blue. And every event she looked like she enjoyed it so much, and she added a lot to the festivities. And every church had a bicentennial cookbook or some type of fundraiser. It was really a nice time, and I think someday after we get through all this and we're all back together again, maybe we can have a little bit of that sense of celebration and appreciation, because that was a good year. Thanks, y'all. Talk to you soon.